Tira, manawa mai e te rani runa nei, manawa mai e te papairaro nei, manawa mai nā makuru ki tēnei wānana ki runa ki nei kōrero. Kauparehia nā hauki no te wā whanau te aukawa ki waho, kia tau te ai o nuku, kia tau te ai o rani. Whānau, ka aureka ki roto, whitiwhiti ai te ora, whitiwhiti ai te ora, kai a ki runa, kai a ki runa. Nau mai nā hua o tēnei kaupapa, puhia mai rā te hao te ora, ka whakamaua kia tīna, haumi e hui e, tāi ki a hoi no tēnā koutou katoa, koutou kua hono mai tēnei ahi a te rāmere te tekau mawhitu o te marama o haki here. Welcome to our kaupapa Whaioranga, te pautua whā, o te kōhana reo, te haumaritana, te Whaioranga o a tātou nei mokopuna, o a tātou nei whānau, o te rawa tātou nei kaimahi. Mōhia, we are starting to come to the closing weeks of this year, 2021, and what a year it has been. The ups and downs, the lockdowns, the lockups, and everything in between. It's been really tough, and I suppose i tēnei wā, we're all suffering from a bit of COVID fatigue, and we are looking forward to spending some time with our whānau. So welcome to these final few programs of Whaioranga that was designed to change the conversation around the mandatory vaccination in the first place and our whakaaro about COVID. Nō reira, e mihi ana ki waku kai kōrero, we're about up to our 13th, 14th podcast, and we are so lucky i tēnei rā, ki te whiwhi, tēnei ahi to have our next kai kōrero with us today. And I don't want to drag it up because he's quite tai mai ia. Ko ana iwi ko te hiku tū, nā ti korokoro, te kapotai, nā ti paiahi, nā ti rora, nā ti wheru, nā ti te taonui. Nō reira, nei rātou tātou nei manuhiri i tēnei ahi e te tākuta Rawiri Taonui, tēnā rawa atu koe.
Kia ora tāhuri, tuatahi e mihi atu ki a koutou, no te kōhanga reo, ko no whē koutou mai te tokatapu tai noa ki te punga o te waka, tēnā ka whakamihi a koutou. Aho ko e toru aku nei ngā kupu he nui ngā whakaroka i roto hoi anō. Huri noa i roto i tō tātou nei zui, tēnā tātou katoa. Thank you, Tahuri, for having me on, and I'm pleased to be here and offer what I can.
Oh, it is a privilege. I have watched you over the last 4 months, I suppose, of COVID, and I know you were prominent in the last breakout last year, but your stats and your kōrero by numbers has really kind of how do you say it speaks for themselves. It speaks for itself. And why do you think, why did you delve into the numbers, I suppose, just to get us understanding why are you so passionate about numbers?
Well, when I was so I was a major in history and Māori studies, and later on I went on to be New Zealand's first professor of Indigenous studies. But when I was a young undergraduate, I actually did statistics and calculus, and I also finished a business diploma in accounting, of all things. But when COVID struck, I actually lost a lot of work lost a lot of government contracts, and so I had a lot of free time, and I was following the daily reports like everyone else, and it just started occurring to me that the Māori story was not being told in the daily reporting, and there were lots of numbers and stats that just seemed to be either glossed over or not mentioned at all. So I went and dug out my calculator that I used when I was doing statistics in 1981, and this is the Casio T300, which was the world's first pocket-sized solar-powered calculator, and it still goes today, even off a light bulb. And I started doing the numbers, and I thought, oh man, like our people need to know this. So that was in April, and I subsequently wrote 50 data reports in 50 days, and I basically haven't stopped. So I think it is really important, and I keep going.
And from the data, I suppose, when you get into it, what did you find out about the data? What was being misrepresented, or what wasn't being reported?
So the inequalities that we experience in life in general stemming, for instance, from the land confiscations and, the what I call the Pākehā Wars on Māori, but the Pākehā call the New Zealand Wars. And going right through, like all our experiences in education, health, justice, and housing, and all those sorts of things. To me, that seemed to be playing out again in COVID. And one of the first things, so it was in April. Actually, I think I started in March almost. Is Māori were designated as a priority group for testing on April the 1st last year. But it was really quite clear by the middle of the month that we were being under-tested. And the Ministry of Health was reporting Māori testing as a percentage of people in each DHB rather than the actual number. And I looked at that and I thought the only reason you would say 1.1% of Māori had a test in the Auckland DHB is because you didn't want to reveal what the real number was.
Which is?
So, I went
0.00 something.
Well, it's a very small number, It could be, like in some cases it was only half a dozen people, and yet we were meant to be a priority. So I actually went through all the DHB populations and worked out what the numbers were for those percentages, and I was quickly able to show that the testing of Māori was running at about 30 to 40% of the national average, and so that figure became known. And there was a lot of pressure applied to the Crown. And then eventually, you may remember, we had those mobile testing units going all over Northland and East Coast. And by the end of May, Māori were actually above the national average. And so, that was one contribution, I think, a good contribution that my mahi made. And then I've applied that to other areas. For instance, in the August outbreak in Auckland last year, in July, I was saying that, testing's fallen off because we had beaten the first wave, but there needed to be surveillance testing because there were still more cases coming into the across the border into MIQ. And unless we tested in a widespread way, there would be an outbreak within a month and it could run away from us. And that's in fact eventually what did happen. So I've just kept going and tried to keep just telling the story and, try and be honest with the facts as well. And that's where it's at.
Yeah, I just want to go back to the, when you talked about the things like education, hauora inequities, absolutely, because that story in some ways is an emotive story. It's a story that's not really told. And, our whānau, through our grandparents and through our whakapapa, we hold that pretty deep down. And you're absolutely right. It is playing out through the numbers now, and the effort and the resurgence now to get Māori vaccinated. As people say, it's come, absolutely, it's come too late. It's come a bit too late. But nonetheless, are you hopeful that, because what we've seen also is a lot of coming together of the different groups of Māori, the hauora, schools, marais, iwi, across the country, standing together on this. Do you see that has been maybe a benefit or something positive to come out of this pandemic?
Yes, well, we finished the first wave with the lowest numbers relative to our demographic population in the country. And that was born off the strength of our communities working together, food parcels and people going and getting other people's prescriptions and, and looking after them. And the vaccine rollout was, we had the wrong strategy there. Starting with older people and moving down, that disadvantaged Māori because a Māori 50-year-old has the same risk from COVID as a Pākehā 70-year-old. But 600,000 Pākehā aged over 65 went first, and the 150,000 Māori between about 45 and 60, they had to wait, but the risk is the same. And the vaccine strategy didn't allow us to vaccinate people as a whānau, so everyone aged over 18 or whatever it was at the time altogether. Now that approach was used in British Columbia and the United States, of all places. And their vaccination rates were were the highest actually in the United States and Canada to start off with. So we started behind the 8 ball, but our communities have come together, and they're doing a really amazing job. So as we're talking here now, Māori health providers have vaccinated there's been a 22% increase in Māori vaccinations in the last 6 weeks. And that increase is higher than the combined increase of all other ethnicities in New Zealand. So they're working hard, but what the story is, we just started from so far behind, and the government's taken away the last barrier really to travel. And road traffic during the holidays is going to be a problem because the police are only conducting random checks for vaccine passes, and there's a real difficulty there, and we're quite a way behind, and there's some significant vulnerabilities.
Yeah, probably vulnerabilities as well as the prejudices are still there. I was like, oh, okay, and a few cars are going to be stopped. Which cars are those, and who's going to be in those cars? But yeah,
yes,
massive, massive effort by our, especially our urban hauora like Waiparera, Turiki Health, and for driving out to these communities, these rural communities that still, I've got my daughters up there with Turiki Health. They're doing some vaccinations at the moment up in Kaitaia. Still under resourced. Our rural areas are still under resourced, and with the border going down this week, they're still quite vulnerable. What do you think? How should we be treating, or how should those communities in those areas be feeling, and what should they do, and how should the ones that are maybe wanting to come and see them, how should we be keeping each other safe?
Yeah, so just to explain what the scale of the vulnerability. So we've had a big focus on the idea of reaching 90% vaccination of the eligible population, those who qualify. But with the greater freedom of travel that we have now, what we need to think about is what is the ratio of vaccination in terms of the whole population. So 90% vaccination actually only means 70% of the population. And using the current figures, what those figures tell us is there are 1.2 million New Zealanders unvaccinated of all ages, and now that the travel ban's gone, that's 1.2 million people who can move around, carry and transmit the virus. Now we could add the partially vaccinated to that, and also a proportion of the fully vaccinated, because current cases, the partially vaccinated and the vaccinated make up 30% of cases. So that adds a higher level of risk. So I think the danger comes from about 1.3 million people traveling where they shouldn't go. So, and that's a high number. Now, when we look at the Te Ao Māori, there are press releases from the government saying that we've got some Māori DHBs for Māori. They're at 90%. But in fact, there aren't. Because the database the ministry uses to figure out how many people are vaccinated, that's based on the people who used the health system last year. Now, what we do know is, for instance, is that maybe about 20% of Māori adults didn't go and see a doctor last year because they couldn't afford it. So they don't appear in the numbers. And my calculation says we've got about 45,000 Māori missing.
I thought your NH number tells you that, your NH number is your ID, I suppose. That.
Yes. So if you use the health system, you get an NHI number. But if you haven't used it, so for instance, my son's very healthy and he hasn't been to see the doctor for 2 years. So my son doesn't appear in the HSU index used to count the number of Māori who have been vaccinated. And so very healthy people might not be there, but also then very poor ones. And there's quite a big gap. So just to get to where our risk is, we have 11 Māori and 11 DHBs are sitting between 70 and 80% full vaccination. We have 9 DHBs where Māori are below 70% full vaccination, and that's where the real risk lies. So those DHBs include 6 of our largest 7 DHBs. So it's the Manukau, it's the Waikato, it's Northland, Bay of Plenty, and then others of them are more rural and they have very low health delivery. So for instance, Te Tai Rāwhiti, Whanganui, and those sorts of places. So one of the scenarios, probably the scenario that emerges, Tahuri, is that you're going to get a couple of families go away on holiday. Pākehā mums and dads will have their vaccine passes, the kids won't. The kids, there are over 2,000 cases in children under 12 years old at the moment. So those kids, and they're innocent. They're not perpetrating crimes or anything. They could go to a holiday area and be infected and not know it. And so what we're likely to see are pockets of cases emerge in multiple holiday spots. And then the risk for Māori is if those cases transfer into low vaccinated Māori communities, and particularly those 9 DHBs that I've spoken about. Now, within those DHBs, there are also some communities where the vaccination rates are even lower. And then that could lead to a large increase in Māori cases. So something like that is very likely to occur. And we'll start to see the rise in numbers, I think, around, it's an unfortunate coincidence with the calendar, but we're probably going to see that around Christmas Day, Boxing Day.
Wow. That's assuming they're going to get tested.
Well, that's one assumption. And then the other one is they get really sick and they end up presenting to hospitals. So if we recall, in Auckland, when the government shifted Auckland from level 4 to level 3, they were saying, they thought they had control of the cases. And I wrote several columns saying that I don't think that's the case, because we had all those media reports about people just showing up to hospital sick, feeling sick, and they ended up being tested positive for COVID. And then you had people in transitional housing, and being also, not going to get tested themselves, but just getting really ill and ending up being tested, and that was it. So I assumed basically what I thought, and it turned out to be right, is that when the Auckland went from level 4 to level 3, it allowed more movement in terms of like essential workers. But of course, with more cars zipping around, you don't know whether there are people in there who shouldn't be traveling around. But it allowed Delta to hitch a ride, and it allowed Delta to move across Auckland and get into our really marginalised, poorest communities. And then that's when it took off, and Māori cases just increased hugely. And this is why at the very beginning of Delta, we actually had the lowest number of cases. But now we've got nearly 50% of all cases.
Is that because of the type of mahi that a lot of our whānau do? In terms of, they are essential workers, they're on border control, they're out there and, delivering health support. Is that part of the way that we live?
I think so. Yeah, in part, the kind of occupations we have mean that we're in more crowded places and those sorts of things. So there is a bit of a risk factor there. But you also mix in with that we had a very poor vaccination strategy. The government's come to the party with $120 million to boost Māori vaccination, and that is really good. And I know that our Māori MPs fought really hard for that. But one of the lessons of, anyone will know this who manages a budget, even in your household, if you've got a really poor strategy, it doesn't matter how much money you throw at it it's a bit late. And that's really what happened to us, and all those things came together in this really little perfect storm. And of course, in the current situation with the border coming down, we also have to remember that when Auckland changed from went to level 3 step 2, you know, so people would go shopping.
Yes.
Well, almost 2 days later, Māori went on a 2-week run of over 100 cases a day, you know, and now here we are with the border coming down, and more than 1 million people being able to travel around the country who aren't vaccinated, and there are not very many checks going to be conducted, and we're still sitting at least in half the DHBs below 70% for full vaccination. So all the signs are bad. I mean, I actually hope I'm wrong, but they feel really bad. Yeah,
you're kind of like the Grinch.
yeah, I am, mate. Yeah.
On Christmas.
Yeah,
But
I haven't actually calculated any numbers for how big it will get, and that's because it looks bad, and I just don't want to do that. Yeah.
No, kia ora. But you're right. In terms of you know, we've seen the case numbers come down a bit. You know, it seems like it's in control. Then it seems crazy. Like the borders are all open now, and then everyone's just gonna. So you kind of feel that impending kind of that something's going to happen, and we hope and we pray. We talk to our Māori whānau to be careful and to stay safe. So you know, do you having we're in an age where there's so much against us. What do you think we can do to kind of like take care of ourselves and each other at this time, especially at this time of the year when everyone's like, yeah, we've got COVID fatigue, we're tired, our wairua is down, we need a bit of a boost, but how do we do that while keeping each other safe?
Yeah, I'll just make one quick point first, Tony. When Auckland was at level 4 and they were there for a month, Delta decreased, was down to just 15 cases a day, and the government decided to move to level 3 after 1 month. Now, we moved to level 3 after 1 month last year against the first wave, but Delta is more than twice as infectious, and I couldn't believe they made that decision. They needed at least 2 or 3 more weeks, and I believe we would have broken Delta then. Taiwan, for instance, has beaten 2 Delta outbreaks to 0. So while we've got cases coming down at the moment, which is really great, they're not low enough to open up the whole country to road traffic. That's the problem. Just as it was in level 4 to level 3, it went down to 15. But last year when we went to level 3, we were on 6 or 7 cases a day, and also sometimes 0. So that's the difference. But in this emergency, the really big thing is Māori have suffered in every pandemic and epidemic that's ever came across our shores. But we're in a much stronger position than we have ever been before. We've got really good leaders. We've got strong communities. You know, there's a greater cohesiveness in our roto i te ao Māori. And it really is a matter about working together, thinking, you know, as we act to protect whakapapa and protect whānau. I'll give you one really good factoid. It's almost the only positive one for Māori. But at the moment, a double vaccinated Pākehā is living with about 84% protection from the virus. But a double vaccinated Māori, despite all the negative figures, we're actually sitting on 93% protection. And the reason for that is, I think, is that because Pākehā are more motivated to get double vaccinated so they can go to the mall and get their hair done.
Yeah.
Whereas Māori that have got double vaccinated, they are thinking more about protecting whakapapa, protecting whānau, being cautious. And it's one standout figure. And it's a matter about keeping that up. Now, in terms of what might unfold over Christmas, it's about working together at any level which suits your situation. either just your household or your extended whānau, your marae community, your hapu community. And the key bit to a tahuri is to have a plan. So think about your whare, think about your, we've got 3 or 4 households where I live. Think about how, if someone gets infected, how you're going to care for them and keep them isolated, and also protect the rest of your whānau. And some of it is simple things like a bit more kai in the house, because if there's a really big outbreak, there could be interrupts in the supply chain. Getting some of those medicines that we often take for flus and colds. Now, they won't cure COVID, but they will relieve a lot of the symptoms and help you get through it, and it's really about having that whānau or community plan. That's the key thing to do. And listen, Tahuri, I get reports from people from all over the place, and when our communities get together and they start brainstorming, I mean, people have been thinking of things that I never thought of, and I'm sitting there supposed to be the advisor, and some of them are just brilliant. So one community I know, their local motel is not going to let anyone stay during Christmas. So the community went up to the hotel and said, could we rent the hotel as a isolation facility? And the motelier said, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Yeah. So that way, if someone's infected, you can protect the rest of the whānau by popping them up there, and you can, have your own isolation centre, essentially. And that went to the government, and they're funding it. So it's all these really cool things. And I think it's a lot about tino rangatiratanga, self-empowerment, and trusting ourselves, because we are really awesome. We've shown that during COVID.
Yeah, we did have and I was going to ask about that. We had Tamaiti on the podcast talking about the very thing about mana motu hake, tino rangatiratanga over oneself to enable the collective to demonstrate. How do you feel about people who the non-vaxxers? I'm not talking about
non-vaxxers.
Well, they call it pro-choice, and then you're not allowed to make a choice. But however you want to do. But we need to, and the kohana reo, I suppose, we feel really aroha for some of our whānau that maybe have been traumatized by something that happened in their whānau in terms of vaccination gone wrong. There's all those stories. But,
the history of Māori vaccination is that the first vaccine to come to New Zealand was a smallpox vaccination, and Māori by the mid 1850s, 2/3 of Māoridom was vaccinated, and our leaders urged the community to get vaccinated because of all the destruction they'd seen from several smallpox epidemics. And Pākehā only picked up the vaccine, smallpox vaccine, after they saw the benefits to the Māori community. It's very interesting, eh? Now, in after the wars and the land confiscations, there was a lot of mistrust of the government, and in that sort of vacuum, that gap, there was also a rising Pākehā anti-vax movement, and they fed information into the Māori community, and that was our kind of first experience of being anti-vax. We can't trust the government. They shot our people. They stole our land. The vaccine might be poisonous. Now, this all came to a head in 2013 when there was a big smallpox outbreak, and the Pākehā anti-vax movement evaporated because they all went and got vaccinated. And the government issued 750,000 vaccines, which they gave to Pākehā, and only gave small proportions to Māori or none at all. And we were all the deaths. Now in this history at the moment with our slow vaccination uptake, Pākehā anti-vaxxers have been able to exploit that period while we're all waiting to be vaccinated, and so Māori anti-vaxxing has kind of picked up. And the other side of it is too, Tahuri, is because with all those negative experiences we have with the government, we talked about those before, education and stuff like that, we have a strong mistrust of government. But in this situation, we need to separate that and remember the suffering that our ancestors experienced, and also remember their decisions to take up the vaccine. So the smallpox vaccine for Māori ultimately eliminated smallpox epidemics. The other two that we suffered really badly from in the 1920s and 1930s were typhoid and tuberculosis. And people like Te Rangi Hiroa, they promoted the vaccine, and our leaders said, let's do it. And by the 1940s, 1950s, typhoid had almost disappeared in our communities, and tuberculosis was going down.
Wow, I think we just a little pause on that, because that is such an awesome history of Māori being proactive in terms of, that is tino rangatira tana in action. And I did do a little pātai on my Facebook, my personal one. If your nanny told you to go and get a vaccine, would you do it? If your kaumata, most said yes, some said no, but I don't know, there it is. There's kind of I suppose no sense of freedom is earned. Freedom is fought for. Freedom is a daily thing in your actions and the way you speak and the way you do things. I don't know where I'm going with this, but it's just that there's that sense, and I suppose I'm looking to our rangatahi, who probably are still in the bulletproof mode. I remember you back at the MSO at Auckland University when I first came over there, and I probably wasn't. I was more in the lecture room up at the top level of the atrium there with my mates, rather than in my lecture room. But there's that sense of kind of she'll be all right with our rangatahi, and they were actually the last on the rank, and now there's all this kind of and they did a great job with get your dot. I got your dot.
Yes.
And that was great. Yeah.
I think the thing with the because we're like coming up right through to October, our vaccination rates in the 12 to 19-year-old and 20 to 34-year-old was very low. Like, it was really worrying. Yeah. One of them was sitting on 20% and one on 30%, and it just didn't look good. But the rangatahi-led vaccinations efforts, they've been powerfully effective, and in fact, in the last 6 weeks again, vaccination in those age groups has actually been higher than everywhere else, roto i te ao Māori, and that's been a really magnificent effort. I do think also, the vaccination campaign was very glitzy, and I don't think that worked with young people, because what I've found is our young people actually have real questions, like genuine questions, and some of them are really important. And what they need is to actually be able to ask someone and then make up their own mind. And I found pretty much universally, if you can give them just a factual, neutral answer, they can spot the difference between facts and fiction. And can give you a good example. I like this one. I published an article on Facebook, and this young guy wrote to me, and he said, "You're Dr. BS. And you got A, B, C wrong, and 1, 2, 3 wrong." And he wrote to me. He said, "I should kick your fat old butt." And I thought, oh, that's a pretty rude message. Yeah. So I wrote back to him and I said, "You're right. I am old, but I've looked at your profile. I am quite old, but I'm quite still active. And I looked at your profile, and you're quite a skinny guy. So maybe things won't go the way you think." At full stop. However, the issues you raised, they are really important. They're important. They're good questions. They're really hard ones, really important. And I said, here's my reply. And I just wrote down the facts in that. Anyway, he wrote back to me. I didn't expect this. 2 or 3 days later, I got a message, and he says, he wrote back and he said, "Oh, thank you for the reply. I didn't expect that. And I'm really sorry I called you an old fat hua." And so I wrote back to him and I said, you're welcome. And I'm sorry I called you slim.
Yeah, no, and we try and have those conversations, and without outing anyone, because our houses are fully vaxxed house, and I'm a bit think that we didn't wait till the got your dots and get all the vouchers and everything. But hey, that's fine. But a lot of those things, I think, and when you notice the cars pull up at those events, the parents are driving the kids. The parents. It was so. In some ways, I think it's what's the whakaaro in your household, and then sometimes I think maybe even though we say pro-vax, well, if I'm not going to get it, my kid's not going to get it. Yet the kid's able, sometimes able to make a decision for themselves. So maybe that's another area of, because they're the ones that are going to be penalised. We do wakaama, right? And so if you're not vaxxed, this is a secondaries, and even the one that's been cancelled recently with our nationals. If you're not vaxxed, you can't go and participate. So already on our tamariki should be having the time of their lives, being young, participating in sports, going to events, going on trips. But it's going to be really hard next year to make sure that wairua, that kotahitanga for our kids, because we're already, it's already hard enough being a young Māori in the education system at the moment, without having that other level of discrimination, I suppose, put on young mind.
Yeah.
So I just feel aroha for them. So I don't know what it was, but it's going to be those whānau need to make those solutions, not for us as parents, but for the tamariki and mokopuna. And I know that's what's happened in kohana reo.
Yeah.
Some of our payokos don't want to get the vaccination, but because it's about the mokopuna and being back in kohana, well, they'll take the jab. They'll take the jab.
Yeah. In the early days of vaccination, I mean, at the end of the day, the idea of choice and freedom that was made by the whānau. And when elders and leaders, see, in those days, they were a lot closer to seeing the huge destruction that the Spanish flu caused, 2013 smallpox epidemic, 1911 typhoid epidemic, 1930s tuberculosis. And the collective exercised their tino rangatira freedom of choice to get vaccinated, to protect everyone, to avoid experiencing that ever again, and history's proven that in those instances that was the right decision. One other instance, which is one of my favorite ones, is when the Spanish flu struck, and the government didn't provide much help to many Māori communities, and when it was over, teams were sent out to small communities to check and see how people were. And there was a team that went to a place in Whaioranga called Waioranga, and there was a small hamlet there. And the guy who led that team that went there, he made notes in his diary. And what he said is, what he wrote was, when we got there, we found 14 people, and 12 of them had died. And they'd all had the flu, but from the condition of the bodies, some of them appeared to have died of starvation. And that's because no one arrived to help them. And what he also wrote is that I know one of the women who died, and she's died, and so have 4 of her children. And her husband actually died in the 1911 typhoid epidemic, and 2 of his children at that time. And he said the only survivors in the community were this woman's last 2 remaining children, who were twin girls aged about 7 or 8. And, that's a real lesson in history, because no one came to help them. And in a sense, we're getting variable help from the government, and we need to act together and exercise our mana motohake together to do what is best for the whānau and the hapu rather than the individual. So, for instance, I'm the oldest one in our little whare, and my kids saying, "Oh, you need to get vaccinated." And I said, I'm waiting we'll get vaccinated when the whole whānau can get vaccinated. And as soon as the age dropped down, we all got vaccinated together. you know, I'm kind of scared of needles, and so I needed actually a bit more support than everyone else. So, but you know, ACT is one, and that's what'll get us through.
You sound like my wife. That's exactly what we did, because she was scared of needles, and we went to one of her doctors who was we went to one of her students who was a doctor, Dr. Lily Fraser. So
yes,
yes, from Waititi. Yeah. So we took her over. We drove into the middle of COVIDville into Mānere.
COVIDville.
Southside, Westside speaking here. But yeah, we went all the way there, all 8 of us, because we had about 9 of us in our party with that baby. But we left our baby. But we went over there and we did it as a whānau, and it was the best thing, because we all knew, you know, there was no doubt. And then we got our next ones as whānau. So yeah, aroha to all those you know, that are still yet to make a choice, that, you know, a choice for themselves. And thank you very much, Rawiri. Rawiri, e mihi nui ana kia koe. You've done so much in your life. I know you've been on journeys and stuff, and you're such a staunch advocate at Auckland University in the days, and with Nanaia, and making sure that Hineahuone remained a place that was a Māori space, and all the battles that, you know, following in the legacy of our kraua who were there. And here you are, one of the few independents flying the flag, and I hope I hope you give it to those fellows, all those huis you're having with the DHBs or those government agencies to ensure that that our interests are represented in a truer picture of the story is told. Because, you know, in terms of us, you know, we only got the internet and we only got government websites, but having your statistics, which we included into our pānui, 50% of cases of COVID are Māori. So, you know, that's a really telling story, and we're just a small proportion of the population. So, yeah, wish you a good Christmas with your whānau. Ki papa I o ea, not te tai toke rei. And kia haumari te noho, ma te ata koutou manaaki mihi nui ana kia koe tākuta Rawiri. Tēnā koe.
Kia ora tāhui.
You want to give a shout out to the whānau or anything?
Yeah, kia koutou katoa, kia kaha, kia tū ake I roto I tō tino rangatiratanga me te moto hake katanga, kia whakakotahi I a koutou, tātou I a tātou, kia noho tahi koutou, mahi tahi koutou, kia haere ngā tahi tōnu tātou katoa te iwi Māori. Huri noa I te zui. Tēnā tātou, te rangi Māori kei rongi I a koutou I te kirihi me te me ngā rā whakatā kātū nei. Hoi anō, tēnā tātou katoa.
E te rangatira tēnā rawa atu koe. O tira koutou katoa, nā kai mā taki hono mai tēnei ahi. It is a Friday, so well done kia koutou, a bit of a heavy topic. And hopefully next week we'll do one more, but hopefully a bit lighter, maybe a bit of a waiata, try and convince someone to come on and give us a few tunes, say nāwari, rawe, te nākau, enari mō tēnei wā, kia tautonu nā manaaki tana ki runa I a tātou katoa, kia haumari te haere, kia nāwari nā whakaaro, pōmari e tēnā koutou.
Pōmari.
Te hoa, tēnā koe.